network meeting of educators, of researchers, part of the European Citizen Science Project. So today we're going to hear from Julia Munuera Garcia, I hope I pronounced her name correctly, who's a PhD candidate at the moment at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and is doing her PhD on participatory mapping at the moment, and also has worked as a research assistant before in the field. Then we will hear from Muki Hakle, and I'm just bring it out. Sorry, I want to introduce you also. Who's a professor at the Department of Geography at the University College London, and he's a team leader at the Learning Climate Institute, where I also work at the moment. He also co-founded the Extreme Citizen Science Group, and at the LPI, so the Learning Climate Institute, Citizen Science team. He has also long interest in participatory methods in citizen science and carried out many projects in these areas. So as per usual, we will hear first from Julia about her project, and I will share the screen, and Julia, just let me know when I should go to the next slide. And then we'll hear from Muki also, who will have a short 3 minutes training on the topic, and he'll be able to tell you more, but he's also looked at all the questions that you submitted, so thank you very much for that, to kind of cater the training to the network. So over to you, Julia, and we'll share my screen. There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you guys to Mapping the Inclusive City, which is, as Clea said, it's a participatory mapping project here in Groningen. The project consisted in generating a method of data collection using ArcGIS to map whether public spaces here in Groningen are accessible to people with disabilities. Can we go to the next slide? Oh yeah, sorry, it's a PDF. So first I'm going to introduce you guys a little bit to Groningen. Groningen is a small city located in the north of the Netherlands. And as you can see from these pictures, there's a lot going on the streets. First of all, the streets have a lot of cobblestones. Second, a lot of the buildings have historical fronts, which means that there's a lot of thresholds, which make them inaccessible. And perhaps the worst factor of all is that bikes here are abundant. There's so many bikes that make it very difficult for people to actually be able to move from people with disabilities, especially wheelchair users, to move in the city. So can we go to the next slide? Oh.
Sorry.
Okay, I think, yes. So in this project, we use participatory research, which may, as you guys possibly all know, but just in case, it means that we involve the research community, in this case, wheelchair users, as part of the research team. We believe that this method was extremely necessary because of two things. First, urban policy often does not specifically address people with disabilities. And second, this is the only way to really research the everyday experiences of in and exclusion for people with disabilities. So in here, you can see the whole team. And we can go to the next slide, I think. Yes, we use for this, this moved very weirdly. So one more. And
yeah, sorry.
Maybe.
I think, sorry, it's a bit hard for me to do it from PDF.
Yeah, sorry, I could have sent it to you in PDF.
That's next time, let me just.
Yes.
myself from, yeah, exactly, it'll be easier like this. So
yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, so next one, because I talked about another one. Yeah, so we combined a participatory research with design thinking, because we mainly ask ourselves, how can we actually include people with disabilities as active part of the research team? So we use design thinking. Design thinking is a research approach that emerged in the field of product design and places the users of a product in its center. In our case, it's wheelchair users. It is an iterative process that empowers individuals and organizations to solve complex problems with creative innovations and solutions centered on the needs of the community that you're producing something for. Nowadays, design thinking as such has become highly effective in generating new ideas, improving products, services, and policies. In projects related with citizen science, it can really benefit the scientists, because the citizens, because it comes in the form of social innovations that address social problems that affect products of peoples or communities. In our case, our approach aligned with the participatory nature of the project itself. Design thinking has different phases, and you can jump around, and you should jump around, because you can always go back and like fix the problems that appear in the next phase. So now I'm going to go phase by phase and explain how we did it. So we can go to the next slide. I think, yeah. So the first 3 steps is emphasizing, defining, and ideating. Emphasizing when you understand the user or the community needs. And for us, it came in the form of a list of one of our co-researchers. These are the people with disabilities we work with. Lisa, who had made a list of all the things she needed in a public space to be able to access it. After this, we had a brainstorm session during the defining phase, and we tried to address the specificities of what people need in the city, people with disabilities need in the city to actually access places and to be able to actually enjoy the city. So we made the brainstorm session, and we quickly went into the ideating phase, because in the ideating phase is when you think, okay, what do we make with this issue? What can we create to help the users' problems be solved or help them in any way? For us, our co-researchers decided that they wanted to create an interactive map that addresses specifically what was needed for them. So what we did is what we decided, what we landed up is to create an interactive map as a method of data collection that we could then disseminate in different ways. So can we go to the next slide? This took us to the prototype and testing phases. So during the prototypes, we use ArcGIS, a technology. In specific, we use field maps and survey 1 to 3. And we created different prototypes of the map. And we use a lot, we were in constant communication with the GeoService here at the University of Groningen, which is a technological department, and like they help us develop this map. During this prototyping phase, our co-researchers created the list of questions they thought were important to add there. And through that list of questions, we organize it together and try to make a structure. Can we go to the next slide? The thing is that during the testing phase, all the problems come up. So our co-researchers went out and tried the version that we created, which is the one on the left of the screen. And we soon realized they looked at 2 things mainly, like, is it user-friendly and are the questions understandable? We soon realized that the first version is not user-friendly, especially because we work a lot with people with spasms. If you see here, like the dots are very close to each other and very tiny. So for our co-researchers, it was actually very hard to press on the right location to fill in the questionnaire that they created. So we decided to change a lot. We changed the location icons. We made them bigger. We made them more iconic. So with like little icons so everyone could see what it was. Our researchers also asked us to use satellite views instead of like this street view, because then they could see better where they were. And at the and then we looked at the questions themselves, and we realized that a lot of the questions were not that clear, and at some points even not relevant. So we had to change all of this. So we went back actually to the previous phase, the prototyping phase, changed everything and went again to the testing. And that actually happened 3 times until we landed with a prototype we liked. Then we went to the iteration in which we made a preliminary data analysis of the data we had. And we decided to distribute it around town to raise awareness. I say preliminary because at this point we didn't have enough data entries to really do a full-on analysis, or what we want to do now, which is like create like heat maps of which areas of the cities are more accessible and which ones are less. So we did the list of recommendations, and we made the analysis alongside our co-researchers. This also meant for us, the university researchers, that we had to adapt the way we did it. We used a lot of visual data from graphics and photos to like sketches where we matched, like we made like a little bit of content analysis, like seeing what were the recurring patterns that came up. And this all happened together thanks to adapting to a more visual way of analyzing. Next slide. So this is the product that we did and distributed. And then finally, the next slide. So at the end, we thought design thinking is a great method to also include marginalized communities, because you really give them a central stage at the research. You include them from the beginning, from emphasizing till the end, where you're like disseminating your results. And we realized that mainly this meant 3 things. First, that there was a different type of model for social impact, that it made very productive interactions between us and societal stakeholders. And finally, that you could include societally relevant forms of impact, such as the flyers. It's not only about going to conference and sharing your knowledge within the academic circle, but also to think about ways to influence practice, influence policy. And that is my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you. If you have any questions, please just add them to the chat, and then after Muki presents his training, then we'll have some time for discussion from Julia's presentation and also Muki's presentation. Over to you, Muki. And if the room is muted, so if you could unmute yourself.
Yes, it should be open now.
Yeah.
Yeah? Should hear me. So thank you, Julia, for such a fantastic presentation and addressing actually one of the questions that came along to explore, and it's kind of give a really nice context. So what I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes is to give you a really, really brief introduction, but pointers that you can use later. We will share the slides with everyone in the group so you can look at them and get more information with it. And it's kind of going through personal experience, but also how to position different things. So if we take the kind of history, once you get into participatory area, citizen science, but especially participatory mapping, at some point you'll come across Sherry Allenstein paper, The Ladder of Citizen Participation. That's a paper from 1969. That's the only picture of Sherry Allenstein that I managed to find online. So who was she? She was someone who's worked in the hosting department in the US, And in '69, with influence from the 1968 student revolution and all the rest of it, we wrote a paper about the importance of participation in urban planning processes. And that paper is cited tens of thousands of times. And it's talking about that actually participation can start from level of manipulation therapy, where you don't involve much people, going all the way to citizen control over decision making. And actually, when we're talking about participatory planning and participatory mapping, there is very big influence from this work. And if we look at where it came along, it kind of started in the late 1970s, when mapping became available, but especially during the 1980s. People like Robert Chambers, who was in the UK and was doing work around a development context, started suggesting things like participatory rural appraisal, a process to engage communities in the design process, in which you are using their knowledge and using different claim models in order to engage people. And that developed later on into something called participatory learning and action. The 1990s was already the age of personal computers, and it suddenly became possible to use computerized mapping. So that's when two kind of directions emerged in this area. One of them is called participatory GIS. If you look at the literature there, it's mostly the global south, whereas public participation GIS is a term that you can see the connection to Sherry Auenstein, so that's in the global north. As we got into the early 2000s, the terms again evolved because the scale of participation increased and there was a potential for crowdsourced geographical information as a mode of participatory mapping, but also to use the sensors that are available in the mobile phone or in other devices, and that's known as participatory sensing. And since the 2010, we kind of call this area citizen science or community science or participatory science in different ways, which also takes those kind of skills. So if we look at personal kind of what was the public participation GIS, that allow, for example, people who never used computer before, here we're talking about the end of the 1990s, to be exposed to information that was held by the authority and then analyze it in different ways. Or then the internet started appearing, and that's one of the early examples of a participatory map from London. And if you look, you can see on the map the way in which you move in different directions, which of course is very difficult to do. But all the information that you see on the map was collected by communities in order to talk about sustainability practices. Moreover, once in the mid-2000s, kind of the Google Maps started appearing, it was possible to do it. And although here we're talking about a map that is almost 18 years old, you can actually recognize it in the way that it's visualized because you see the Google Maps information. Also in the mid-2000s, the project called OpenStreetMap that allowed people to create their own map, the Wikipedia of the world, was created originally at UCL and then spread across other places. And the new devices and methods that allow people to interact, such as touchscreen and mapping, that allow people to discuss it in a different way. And here you see a community discussion where people both using digital information but also printed map, each of them got their own advantages in different ways. The kind of things that can be done in citizen science within the extreme citizen science group include working with community, in this case in Cameroon, discussing with them through ethical process of free and fair informed consent, which you can trace back all the way to the participatory mapping of the 70s, what they want to collect and how they want to collect. Then there can be a process of designing using pictograms, because the community that you work with are people with very little literacy, which then leads to a software that allow taking all these images all these pictograms and turn it into an app overnight. So that app with the Sapelli application can then be used in different ways. So this is an example of a process that shows you, for example, how you start from the home screen. So you select, in this case, it's for monitoring illegal poaching. You say that you've seen a dead animal. Which dead animal you've seen? Elephant, gorilla, pangolin, you've seen blood on the ground, or you've seen a trap. And then after that, deciding if to take a picture or record an audio, have the location, and approve the information, and then we start back again. And this is a data collection tool that is available in Cameroon and in other places in the Congo Basin to allow communities to record data by themselves about things that are important for them. So once you set up the application, you can then set it up, put it on the phone, and start collecting the data. A lot of time, the data collection is happening in groups and not only by individual in those contexts, which show you that across these examples, you see different aspects. There was always something to do with the map. So this is the visualization of the information that people collected. There will be attention to what the participant want to do, and there will be different level of participant control over the data and how it is used. So in OpenStreetMap, it's collected and shared openly with everyone. In the green map, it is shared to other people to use, but the process is structured. And in Sapelli, the process is actually engaging community throughout the process. So let's look at the practice and some hints from my background, which is mostly, I've done a lot of bottom-up mapping. In the software that I'll show you later on, you'll see some examples that are using more crowdsourced approaches to mapping. So let's look at some principle that can be applied to practice of participatory mapping. So a lot of participatory mapping, especially in the bottom-up side, relying on what's called participatory action research, which is a methodology in social sciences. Sometimes it is a bit controversial in some of them, where you are not just doing the research in order to observe community from the outside, just like the examples that Julia has shown. It's something that people are using in order to make a difference and to act in the world. So the research is informed, it's detached, it's doing the best thing that scientific research can do, but the research is not done in a vacuum in order to write a paper. It's done in order to make a real action in the world. Then you can also think about the fact that those type of research that you do in participatory mapping usually integrate technological or quantitative type of research in order to use, say, mapping software, geographical information system, or GIS, and also ethnographic and qualitative data. So the impression that people got, the experience that people got, and tools like AI allow us to gather massive amount of qualitative information and make sense of it. There is also something that you need a lot of time to do, which is, especially in my own practice, about thinking about how the technical development that you do is integrated with technology, with science, technology, and society research, or thinking about the social theory, which you've seen in the references that Georgia done, and that's very common in this area. So what kind of things would I give you as tips? One of them is work with communities. A lot of time, participatory mapping is actually working with communities in place. So you don't work with individual, something that is also known as methodological individualism that exists in many social sciences, where you treat society as a collection of individuals. You're actually seeing something in the synergy of people and their interaction with space and place. But that's, I'm telling you that a lot of it from the position of a human geographer. The next thing is to always remember that your project is not in empty space. It is got a context, and the context can be, the mapping itself can be either facts that you collect or different opinions that people do. But those things are influenced by either the social context, say the local inclusiveness, who is involved in the process, the technical ability of people, and so on. So if you're working with people who are not reading and writing, you will use pictogram. If you're working with an advanced community, you might use the internet. But also there will be political and economic aspects that influence. Do you pay your participant or not should be consideration of the relevant aspect. And even if you do the project at all, because if the political situation is with very high tension, maybe you should think about if to do it. So again, we see the technology and society that you can't separate. Another thing that works really well in participatory mapping, and I've written different papers about that, and I'm happy to share, some of them will be shared, is to use directed processes with a lot of open approaches. So in Mapping for Change, a social enterprise that I was involved in creating, we start the process by showing people which information available about their neighborhood. That's the first introduction. That can then lead to a discussion about what information people want to collect in addition, or is there any data gap, and then can be either general perception mapping, so opinion and view, or citizen science when you actually collect some facts. And then there is a really important aspect that even if you digitize it, you have to decide with the community if the information is shared or not. Now, if you look at the diagram, it's got a lot of arrows going on in different directions. And that's exactly where the openness is coming. This is a general sketch of the direction, but there is a lot of variation. And the same thing in the example that I showed you with Sapeli. Then the next recommendation, and again, you've seen it, and it's very high recommendation in this area, is go where people are. If you build up an app, you will need to convince people to download the app and use it and so on. But if, for example, you discover that your community is using WhatsApp already, why not use it? And if you are working with a specific community, go to where they are. Your life will be easier if you go to the community center when people are gathering anyway. So the example that you see there is in South London, where we identify a local festival and just got permission to open it up. The next thing is to keep things really simple. So it might be exciting from some perspective to say I'll develop an app, but actually never underestimate paper. And even the example that you see there of paper is not always good. A lot of people find paper maps confusing, and therefore aerial imagery, so something that you print from Google Earth, might be more effective. And don't try to use cutting edge technology unless you have a very, very good reason to use it. If you want to be inclusive, think about how to keep things simple. And also you think about something between inclusiveness, you might consider which type of inclusiveness you want. There is passive inclusiveness that allow you to build something and then to expect people. You send an email out, you advertise it in different ways, and then you sit down and expect people to join in if they have the time and willingness. Or you might decide, actually, I do want to reach to a specific community in my city or in my community, and then you really need to think about your process and how you do that. So assertive inclusiveness requires you to pay a lot of attention if you want to be inclusive in this way. So finally, I'm going to cover a few tools that are available of different types, and we'll see some other examples from what we've seen so far. So for example, one interesting tool that takes participatory mapping in the direction of crowdsourcing is Munuera. And it was created in Finland, and it's a very effective tool to run questionnaires, which means that what you do is say you have a planning process and you want to reach out to a lot of people and to click on places and just answer few questions, and that's the way they contribute. Yes, in the Einstein ladder, that will be considered on a low level, but we also have to remember that a lot of people don't want to be involved deeply in each and every step of the process. They might want just to spend 5 minutes contributing to a community project. That brings you very close to crowdsourcing. And if you do say the process, like take the example that Julia gave us, that you're doing some activity and you understand what are the issues of disabled community, you won't be able to run this small scale process everywhere. So you might want to reach out to the rest of the disabled community and tell them, just spend 5 minutes, give us some information about your area, and we'll use things that we learned from the rich co-created process in order to implement it. So those tools shouldn't be just thought about as non-participation. They are effective tools when you want to do it at scale. Another tool that kind of work in between is something called community maps for mapping for change that allow different type of issues for community. So here you see an example where communities were contributing air quality data in different parts of London. And each community was having a device called diffusion tubes. They use it for a month and share it, and all this information is gathered in one place. Community map is a tool that in both cases, MapShare and community maps, you need to pay some cost to the company. Both cases, they will do some deal for universities and researchers and allow people to run the process in a reasonable way. Or if you are lucky and your university got ArcGIS, as we seen just in the example, ArcGIS Online is really powerful. And you got something called Survey 123, one tool, or the Citizen Science Reporter, depending on what your university allows you. And you create a questionnaire, and that questionnaire can be used in different way and collect the data. Not all universities have ArcGIS Online, but in many countries across the world, any school below university will have free access to Survey 123, and therefore they can be used in very imaginative way. We're getting here a bit about the ethics, that if you're working with school, of course you have more complexity. Another tool that is open source, but a bit more complex to implement, is the Open Data Kit. And it's not the only one, there are other tools like that. I'm just showing you the classes of project. So Open Data Kit is only for you to kind of create a form, and the form will have different questions. So you click on the form, you load it, and then you can start filling in the data on the form, and you can use it in different way. There are other tools, even from Google, that came recently that can be used. So those are a set of tools that are focusing on the data collection, not on the visualization. And you can use them in different ways, whereas Survey 123 is a tool that's doing both sides of the equation, or Sapeli that I showed you earlier is doing that in different ways. There is Sapeli, which I mentioned to you, a software for people who don't read and write, and it's open source. It's an Android app that you can use and designed to work with people who don't read and write. And then there are platforms for things like citizen science. So CitSci4Org is something that runs from the University of Colorado and allow people to create a project. Again, I think there is a small fee that you're paying to CitSci, but it's based on GIS and allow you specifically to record data about ecology. It's really good for ecological data. And again, it's not the only one around. You got also iNaturalist or eBird for bird observation and so on. So that was a really short introduction, and I know we only have 20 minutes to cover things. So where do you read more or doing things? First of all, there is an International Society of Participatory Mapping. You can find it and join in and be part of it. Through the society, there was the book of evaluating participatory mapping software. Unfortunately, it is a costly book that comes through Springer, but you might be able to ask for it through interlibrary loan. And also there are loads of good practice in participatory mapping, such as the one from the National Fund for Agricultural Development. In addition to that, there is a book that I was involved in publishing, a lot of it about the Sapeli project that you can find in this free book on UCL Press. And finally, although that's now kind of the last update was almost 9 years ago, you can find a lot of bibliography, annotated bibliography from one of the top experts in this area, Mike McCall, under the ppgis.net website. So a lot of information, and I'll be very happy to answer your question and also explore them together with Julia. Thank you very much.
With a lot of examples and a lot of relevant resources. So I just a reminder that we're going to transcribe then this meeting to kind of add all the information that was given into a Google document. We'll also share some of the questions that we hope we'll share with Julia, that she can answer some if she'd like, but also to a network of educators and trainers. So there will be quite some resources we hope coming out of this. Now I'd be very happy to leave the floor to anyone that has any questions or experience also in participatory mapping. And please don't hesitate to open your mic or raise your hand in your video.
So let's start with Julia. So I see your answer. I've now just looked at your answer on the chat about the action research and the design approach. So, and I mentioned that it's sometimes controversial or good aspect. So was that a part of your consideration about how the research would be accepted when you selected between action research and design led or not? What were the considerations?
Yes, so it was a mix between, I think, also just doubting a little bit whether you could call yourself action research if you're not really like solving something. And but it's like if I look at it now, I think it could also have been part of the publication we did, and it could have benefited a lot. But I think we mainly use design thinking because it's so focused on the product that you're making. And in our case, that was like the interactive method of data collection, that we wanted to, focus on how to involve people with disabilities in all the aspects of creating a product, and then design thinking fitted much better. But I think once we have an enough number of data entries, I think the results will be differently analyzed now, because now I think you can really like make the case for action research and to put that more central. Does that answer the question? Yeah, right? Always.
Hi, yes, it does put some clarity. The reason I asked is because of the similar steps that you take, yes, that cyclical process, that it looks similar to the action research methodology. So I was just trying to figure out if it's probably a new way of describing action research. Yeah, because I did use action research for my PhD as well. And yeah, so I was just trying to understand where you're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's also a very good question.
And the same topic, I'm wondering, how do you differentiate action research and your design thinking? Like, what did you feel like? What was the barrier for you to call it action research?
For me, it was the difference between the process and the product. So we focus so much more on especially like at this point, when we wrote the article that I shared in the chat and all, we focus so much more on the process of creating this data collection app or map, that for me, that would be that's at least what we consider. We were hesitant to use action research because we didn't focus so much on the results of like the analysis and everything.
And correctly, it's more you weren't sure what was going to be the outcome of your
Sorry?
if I understand correctly, can you hear me? Yeah. It's you weren't sure what was going to be the outcome of the design, of the product design, and if there because I wonder if action research, you really need to have a social outcome or social impact that comes out, and you were not 100% sure about this.
Yeah, I agree with this. I honestly think it fits also very well action research with this project. I think they're both pretty similar, and right now I cannot really think of a reason why they should be separated when you're including so closely the community of interest, let's say. So I think for me, like the thing is that when we were looking at research on action research, it was so like problem solving focus that we were really hesitant to say that we were using it, because we were not really solving anything as much as we were making research, right? So that's mainly the reason why we opted for design thinking instead of action research. But I do think they're really interconnected, and it will definitely benefit me to look again into action research and include it.
And that leads to another aspect that people raised in the question, which was the issue of ethics in participatory mapping. So I'll just talk a little bit, very briefly about the experiences that I showed you. So I mentioned that when you're working with children, you need to pay special attention to all kind of aspects of ethics, but also across it, you always go back to these aspects of Einstein, and that's why it's so persistent. There is big power differences between you and the researcher and the community that you work with in any situation, and you need to consider what are the ethical practices. And it's actually a bit more complex than the usual, because in research, a lot of time we are used to ethical aspects that are defined to our discipline about what we allow in psychological research or in medical research. And once we tick those boxes, we're feeling that we are okay. Whereas you could see it actually in the different project that I've shown and in Julia's project, is that once you engage in more of an active role within the research of people that are a lot of time not very strong in society, such as disabled people, you are creating a certain commitment and a certain obligation by yourself to work with them in a way that is appropriate and suitable. And kind of that just came along when we discussed about the action research. But you do need to think, so there are ethics that are generic, like, for example, having the informed consent so we can use the information in the research, but we also want to have aspects that are taking ethics beyond. So there is all sorts of papers that are discussing, for example, that if you're doing participatory mapping, you should give the participant the option to be co-authors of the paper that you write out of it, or that you need to consider how inclusive you are. This point about assertive inclusiveness came along because it was noticeable in one of my research that I've actually missed part of the community, and the ethics of what I'm doing is not just about doing it right, but also to include people in the appropriate way. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit about this because I think ethics is often something you also think a lot about in academic formulations. Let's say you have to apply for your consent forms, you're like to the board of ethics, etc. But when you're working, at least in my case, what happened to me is that ethics is something that you always need to consider. So for us, like when we decide to do something new with the project, the first thing is to talk to our citizens, like our co-researchers, and be like, is this something that interests you? Yes, no, then we can continue, or we stop before we start, because you are asking time from them. Another thing is that we also constantly ask them, like, are we doing good? What should we like change? What would work for you better? And for us, like something that they mentioned was that they would like to have, for example, a bigger planning. So we always send a couple of days earlier what we are doing, because we meet every Friday because that fits their schedule. So we meet every Friday at the same times. And they were like, yeah, I just right now want to have a better overview. So we need to send them like an overview of the coming month every time. So this is things that also, I think ethics is something that happens in collaboration with your citizen science, and you always need to check that they are doing fine and what you can do to make their experience better.
Great. So other questions or things that this training gave you, or where you take it next? Hello. We still don't hear you, Nolan.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the nice presentations. And I was wondering, this question is for Julia, how to translate this knowledge from the mapping that you have to policy making, if you are making the link, because after that, it will be useful to have this information, no? And maybe how accurate it needs to be so people can take it into account.
Yeah, so this is also a very good question. My supervisor, and well, I also help. We wrote a little book for like kind of suggestions for the town hall here. But as Leon, one of our researchers said, and this is, I think it's very important to keep in mind, not everything needs to be adjusted. You know, not everything needs to change, and not everything, let's be realistic, is gonna change from the research that you're doing or for a policy to change. I think the most important thing for policymakers is to include the people who they want their policies to affect positively, hopefully also. So like if you include people with disabilities, also this relates a bit with the question that Clea gave me, which I was gonna type, but I will just say, like what I learned from working with them is just you really realize the little things that are in the streets, in the supermarkets, that are really easily fixed, like from literally just making the alley 10 centimeters bigger to like so things that to make, like for example doors that are not extremely heavy, so they can also open it themselves. There's like small changes that can be done and could be included in policy making, but I think the main thing is to also include the communities that you want your policy to affect in the creation of the policy making.
Okay, thanks.
Perhaps I would ask maybe what is one of your favorite thing about this research tool? let's say, or what you've enjoyed the most of doing participatory mapping, and this can go to both you and Muki. Why would you recommend it, and also maybe what are some of its limitations?
I need to remember to. So I'll answer first. Ever since so the first thing, actually, the first time I've done that, I was a foreign student in Britain, but I was lucky to be in a research group that was have a lot of expertise in focus groups and other discussions, but they were interested in public participation GIS, but didn't have the technical person to do that. So it was an opportunity to reach out. And someone was teaching me, just like I now teach others, how to approach a community, how to do the ethnography, how to sit in the local cafe, and how to ask when there is a community meeting and other things. But the experience ever since were fantastic, of just sitting next to a person who is 90 and telling you about histories of the West End in London in the 1920s, you know, when I was doing things, or other things like that. And those opportunities are invaluable. Also, there is, you know, the other aspect is that people who are involved in it know that it's not always going to lead to a change in their community, but they know that because they work with the university, you give them new sources of power and opportunity to be listened to. And that feels, you know, for me at least, it makes the academic work more relevant, more real, because it is, after all, I need sort of a justification of how can I justify the investment in academic work when there are social problems and society should have invested in them too. So by closing the loop and using the power that science gives us, you can really make contribution to society. It doesn't need to be all the time, but it's something that at least for me was very important.
Thank you, Muki. Julia, would you have anything to share about one thing that you really enjoyed using participatory mapping, and perhaps a limit to it that you saw?
Well, I completely agree with what's been said. I think that's also, like, you summarized perfectly what I like about participatory research, to be honest. I think the main challenge, like I personally am having, is to find this, as you called it, passive not passive inclusivity, like I don't remember the term, but when your participants, like, for example, in my case, I need more people to fill in the questionnaire, but they don't need to be as active as my co-researchers have been, just to fill it in. And that is kind of hard, because sometimes people can be like, oh, but why would I spend time on this? So yeah, that's the main difficulty I find, but I absolutely love participatory research.
Great. Thank you very much for both of you for your really insightful inputs on the topic. I think it was really interesting and relevant for us to have this talk today. We're going to leave it at that. I think if no one else has a question, please don't hesitate to raise your hand. We just have, I guess, 1 more minute. So
yeah. And please also tell us how was this training sessions, and what would you like us to do better or different in future sessions. So we want those sessions to be very relevant and helpful for what you're doing. So please give us small feedback.
and our next meeting is planned for the 10th of May. We'll come back with an email to confirm that with you. But it should be on the 10th of May from 12 to 1 p.m. And the topic will be which form of and when is public engagement relevant for different steps of the research process. So to kind of explore what are some different types of public engagement and at which stage of the research process they're most relevant for. So thank you very much for your input and your contributions. And we hope to see you also next time.